So today, Professor Ian Miles from Alliance Management Business School and Professor David Dolores from HEC Montreal will discuss their views on post-pandemic new normal of knowledge-intensive business services. Well, as we all have experienced, the pandemic has pushed organizations to be dependent upon remote working. Well, while some sectors have easily adjusted to such changes, some sectors, such as knowledge-intensive business services, that had heavy reliance on in-person interactions with clients, must have faced greater challenges. So as we are now seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, fingers crossed, it is timely to discuss how this sector would capitalize on their pushed remote working experience for post-pandemic engagements. So it is likely that this sector may adopt a hybrid model of working, but we know very little about how this model would look like and its impact on organizational innovation and sustainability, as well as on organizational interactions with clients and wider ecosystem. So today's debate will address these points. So with this opening remark, now I would like to invite Professor David Dolores to discuss his views on post-pandemic new normal for knowledge-intensive business services. He will offer a broader view of the sector, followed up with some general predictions on the post-pandemic new normal. Okay, over to you, David.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I will just share my PowerPoint. Oh, let's see if it's working.
Perfect. It's working, David.
It's working. So, okay, I just have two computers. Just let me sure if I'm not. Okay, good. So thank you very much for the invitation. So today, what I would like to do or share, it's to share my view about, as I say in the title, some speculative reflection, because as unlike Jan, I haven't started to do any empirical work on the possible consequences and implication of COVID-19. We just launched a survey on R&D KIBs in Montreal that we start to address some of the question about post-pandemic actually and the implication of COVID-19 on their new business strategy. So today I would like to just raise some of the biggest reflection based on my own interpretation of the crisis. So what I would like to do today with you, it's to go briefly to set up the scene. So to briefly introduce you what we know, what we mean by knowledge-intensive business services, and what are their role and identity. Then I will present some of the preliminary results that I have on the latest paper that we conduct a systematic review on the literature on innovation-related topic on KIBs innovation, and I will conclude and discuss some of the issue related to what extent COVID-19 will impact on KIBs innovation research. So first, what are KIBs? So let's start with a very simple question, but since the seminal work of Miles in 1995, this question is still debated. So what are KIBs? KIBs are very specific services that involve economic activity which are intended to result in the creation, accumulation, and dissemination of knowledge. KIB sector constitute a service subsector and include establishment and firm whose primary activity depend on human capital, knowledge, and KIBs. So KIBs has very specific characteristic. First, knowledge is the most essential asset of KIBs. KIBs almost exclusively consist on transferring knowledge and skill to client or user organization. KIBs will combine different type of highly specialized knowledge, which will be both codified and tacit, in order to develop problem-specific solution. Another characteristic of KIBs, like the production of knowledge-intensive services, will require frequent interaction and close collaboration between KIBs and their clients or KIBs and their other organizations. And finally, KIBs act as an intermediary between the client knowledge base, especially the client tacit knowledge base, and the pool of codified knowledge through increasing the exchange of otherwise disconnected pool of knowledge. In the literature, again, in the seminal work of Miles, there are several scholars who have tried to classify different types of KIBs. So we can identify 3 broad classes of KIBs. The first one that are dealing with social and professional services, which are called professional KIBs. Those dealing with science and technology are those that are called technological KIBs, and those dealing with creative contents are creative KIBs. And you can see on the overhead here the different type of services belonging to these different type of KIBs. KIBs also supply different type of business services and technological related services to clients and users. These services comprise, as identified on the overhead, different services related to research and development, management, consulting, information, communication services, human resource, employment, legal services, accounting, financing, and marketing, and so on. So let's move now on the role and identity of KIBs. I think, and it's maybe I'm biased here, and because I'm biased, but I don't want to make any favor to Jan, but I think this is the best code that you can find to identify the role and identity of KIBs. Miles stressed that KIBs are doing, what KIBs are doing is locating, developing, combining, and applying various types of generic knowledge about technology and application to the local and specific problem, issue, and context of their client. So basically what this means is that KIBs, by the nature of their activity, are interactive. They are located at the center of interacting learning system involving knowledge creation, knowledge sharing, and knowledge diffusion with their client and other organizations. In other words, KIBs are provider of technological and professional knowledge to other industrial sector and are, of course, supporting knowledge base upon which knowledge in all other firm and industry are built. If we move on also on the role of identity of KIBs, we can see over the last 15 years that KIBs industry and the different KIBs subsector are among the most dynamic segment of the service sector in the OECD countries since the mid-80s, and is one of the most rapidly growing sector in the North American economy. This expansion, of course, has contributed to increasing importance of service and innovation for long-term economic growth and transformation of regional and national economy. Business services, and in particularly knowledge-intensive ones, are crucial in both trends, and consequently, interest in the research of knowledge-intensive business have recently become very important subject of study. You can see here as an example, when we look about this table about the KIBs and employment growth, the importance of employment growth in KIBs and the different region of Quebec. What we can see is over the last 10 years, the growth is significant when we observe that the employment in KIBs had grown of 34.6% in the entire province of Quebec over the last 10 years. What is even more interesting from a geographical perspective is that even if Montreal concentrate more than 25% of the total employment of KIBs, the highest growth region in terms of KIBs employment are those regions outside the metropolitan area but located within 1 hour from Montreal. And we can just see the growth over the last 10 years of the S3 region, which is about 1 hour from Montreal, which you see the number 76.7. You see the region of Montreal, Montérégie, sorry, which is the growth is 42.7, and Capitale Nationale 49.8. We also notice a new trend over the last 10 years of the importance of growth is the importance of employment growth of KIBs in peripheral and rural region. You can see here the percentage of growth over the last 10 years in the small peripheral and rural region of Bas-Saint-Laurent and also Côte-Nord and Nord du Québec. Oh, I can go quickly over that. So when we look specifically about the role and identity of KIBs, particular interest has been shown toward the roles of KIBs of 3 specific roles. The first one is KIBs defined as a knowledge facilitator and vector. Okay, KIBs, as I just described, perform multiple services activity. However, one of their main contributions will be to provide to their client with innovation support. In that context, KIBs will act as a facilitator of innovation. KIBs also is a very interactive player which means that KIB will be engaged in collaboration, and firm will use KIBs as knowledge source to help them for their innovation activities. So KIBs are also defined as carrier of innovation. And finally, KIBs can be described as a source of service innovation, as innovator in their own right. Just like manufacturing, KIBs can be internally innovative and introduce innovative strategy. KIBs and the firm itself will make sure that they have the right condition and element that will help to develop the capacity to introduce or significantly improve new services, new organizational practice, or new marketing method, or already existing one. So if we move on to the third part of my presentation, we conduct a systematic review of the literature. When we conduct this about KIBs and innovation, when we conduct this systematic review, the data we use for this review did not really reflect on the COVID crisis, because the article include in the review were those published between 2001 and 2019. So this review allowed us to systematically analyze the different study and the different team tackled under the generic under the work of innovation and KIBs. So here the figure just show actually the review the flow diagram about how we identify the different article, and the review is based on the analysis of 90 article that deals directly with innovation and KIBs. So let's move on. So based on the review and coding machine, we developed a coding machine that we code the different article along different dimension. We distinguish 6 different research stream of KIBs innovation research. The first research stream is about the specific factor that influence innovation. So in this specific research stream, we can find 4 categories of study: those dealing specifically with innovation output, those dealing with innovation strategy, so trying to understand the mode of innovation characterizing KIBs. A third category of this study concerned the different internal factor that will impact or that will have an effect on innovation. That include especially R&D and human capital. And a fourth group of study under the specific factor influence innovation are the external factors. So there are studies that look specifically on intellectual property right and cooperative behavior. The second research stream consists of study that try to understand how knowledge is managed within KIBs firms and how knowledge strategy are adopted and developed by KIBs. The third research stream concerns work on open innovation, and in this specific research stream, most of the work focus on 2 things. One is to understand the cooperative pattern of KIBs and their impact on innovation, and the second group of work concern the scope and depth of knowledge source. They try to apply a Carlson and Lawson breadth and depth of knowledge source in order to understand how does this impact of KIBs innovation. The fourth research stream concerns the use of KIBs in the innovation process. So these studies deal with 3 different topics. The first one is the contribution of KIBs in user innovation activity. So basically, these studies try to understand how the use of KIBs impact on the innovation activity of KIBs user. The second group of study concern the mechanisms that govern interaction between KIBs and their user. Here, the study focus on specifically the role of trust, the role of proximity, and the role of face-to-face in delivering different services to KIBs user. And the third group of study concern the role of geographical proximity. The role of geographical proximity, location of KIBs use. Here, these kind of study, mainly done by myself and Richard Shermer, we try to understand the geography of the use of KIB services. The fifth research stream concerns the geography of KIBs innovation. In this study, we find 2 types of study. The first one, we try to understand the location determinant of KIBs in different regional and national contexts. And the second group of study concern the impact of agglomeration economy of KIBs innovation. And the last one, the last research stream concerned internationalization. This research stream has the less number of articles dealing with this specific topic. Essentially, the article dealing with internationalization and KIBs innovation try to understand the driver and determinant of KIBs internationalization and export activity. Surprisingly, among all these study review, there are very few that has been dealing with digital service production and delivery and its implication for innovation, the division of labor, innovation, and KIBs organizational and sustainability. So the webinar today deal with a very, very important and under-researched topic in KIBs research, at least in KIBs innovation research. So if we move on now to the core of the presentation and the webinar, so the key question now that arose from the research is how COVID-19 will affect the macro picture, let alone the micro level. In other words, how KIBs innovate and what new challenges and changing pattern in their business model and environment will be affected by post-COVID, sorry, there's a mistake, world. Of course, there's the lazy answer to that question. And the lazy answer will be that finally there's no answer to this question because we don't know yet what will be the post-pandemic situation, because we're still dealing with the situation at the moment, and we're not, even though we see the light at the end of the tunnel, we're still not managing the end of, we're still into this crisis. And so we don't know how it will affect innovation and business model. However, as academic, we have to sometime to figure out about how to not to speculate, but to try to provide some tentative answer based on previous research. And even if we don't know, we can certainly pretend that we know something that will maybe different in the possible implication of this new reality, but we don't know specifically which one, because there's up to date, to my knowledge, there's, with the exception of Jan's study, who will present some preliminary data in his presentation, there's no study that have dealt specifically with the application of COVID-19 on business innovation model in KIBs industry. So I would like to share with you some 5 observations based on my understanding of the possible implication of COVID on KIBs innovation. So my first observation concerned the innovation in KIBs. We can see, or we can observe that COVID can have some positive implication for KIBs. We can see that there will be an evolution of demand, and KIBs can play a role in this evolution. For instance, for example, the health sector will certainly experience an increase in demand, for example, for vaccine, for new treatment, and for various health protection to solve the pandemic. Second example, the lockdown of social distancing measure also leads to increased demand for digital tool for work, for instance, work from home application, works exchange in terms of virtual meetings tool, research, and the provision of virtual services. And in such cases, KIBs can play a key role. Second point is that the COVID-19 will have greater opportunity related to the transformation of digital technology and tools, big data, analytics, and AI. Of course, this observation is quite interesting because with the wider uptake of the digital technology application as well as the big data and AI tool during the COVID-19 crisis may result in specific in an increase, for instance, in the digital innovation. That will be growing demand, of course, for digital application. And this, as I say, will hail from e-health services, but to virtual conferencing and different tool and software in order to allow this new activity to operate. There will be more activity and collaboration that will be held virtually, so KIBs may provide and contribute and support the tool and the services necessary to these activity to perform this activity in an efficient way. However, these new opportunity with this evolution could be also impacted by the market uncertainty and the decrease in demand. Of course, the impact of COVID on the supply of business innovation are primarily due to the implementation or lockdown of social distancing measure, which could result in a lack productive and research facility, reduce, of course, the productivity, reduce the productivity of worker, and also limit the opportunity for the worker to connect with others. Okay. My second observation relates to open innovation, or the way KIBs will interact with external organization, clients, and other organizations. First implication relate to customer relationship. KIBs, for instance, with their project business model, will expect to lose some of their consultant, loss of their worker. Therefore, in this time of crisis, they could instead have bid to have a better long-term relationship with their current client and deliver more, how can I say, productized project and deliver project remotely. So based on this new situation, some KIBs will even try to standardize or productize their project knowledge, and try to shift into platform business model in order to continue to maintaining these customer relationship, but also in order to delivering the project and the services remotely. The other observation about the interaction is about collaboration. Of course, COVID-19 has challenged global collaboration, demonstrate its importance. Now we can, with the extensive restriction of traveling and in-person interaction, of course, the COVID-19 has to some extent interrupt the mobility of human resource to interact, to exchange, and to extend and to see each other in order to exchange knowledge and to discuss about different projects. Of course, some team or some KIBs efficiently utilize digital tools and continue their joint point despite this important contrast. But a key question that emerged is about the geography of these and the importance of geography of KIBs collaboration interaction with client and users, and the extent to which, I don't have answer now, the answer to which digital tool can compensate for the absence of face-to-face interaction. If I move on the impact of KIBs sectoral difference, we can also observe, or the COVID-19 crisis may result in a widening gap between P-KIBs and T-KIBs and C-KIBs, creative KIBs. Why? Because these different KIBs do not benefit at the same level from the digital tools, and some of these KIBs will be positively impacted by this increase about the use of these digital tools, whereas other may be more affected by this negative impact of the crisis that those tries to during the pandemic. I can say for experience, the creative KIBs has been severely impacted, at least in the case of Quebec and in the case of Canada. I can just give you an example. My wife is working in the event and advertising industry, and the 13th of March 2020, everything stopped. All our contract for the entire year stopped in 2 hours. That all customer just stopped the contract. So there was not much going on. Of course, there was new activity related to promote new events online, but it's of course some of these sectors have suffered by the COVID-19 crisis. At the same time, the dynamics of some KIBs and the demand for a certain product may help sustain new innovation activity beyond the pandemic and also support the wider ecosystem in dealing with the crisis. For instance, the demand for digital services may not only offer opportunity for digital company or T-KIBs, but also for P-KIBs to offer innovative services that will satisfy new demand. So now our key question is to understand about his for PKIBs, we will observe post-pandemic a new shift towards digital innovation. So I don't know if I have 2 or 3 more minutes. This is the, okay, this is why me too, I see you. So I have
that's fine.
Okay, give me 5 more minutes, and then I will go quickly on the next one. So the fourth observation is about the geography of KIBs innovation. So we have to rethink the homology between the usual place of work and the location of economic activity, of course. Latest work of Richard Shermer showed that actually KIBs are highly affected by this shift toward working at home, which is considerably higher in services as compared to other sector. So if KIBs adopt a more hybrid model, that means in person or remote working, then it will become clear even to casual observer that economic activity does not necessarily occur as a usual place of business. Does that mean that it's the death of distance? So this question that remains, is this activity removed from other location? If this is the case, which region, place, location will benefit the most of this transition or this post-COVID or this post-COVID venture? And my last observation before I go to the conclusion is the importance of being there. And this raises an important question, knowing that the issue of trust is significant to understand how KIBs function, how KIBs operate, and how KIBs transfer knowledge to their client. So trust with clients are very important. So now one question that remains is how trust can be developed without face-to-face interaction or frequent interaction with clients. Another question that remains open is like, what dimension of trust are important, and which step on the delivery process, trust will remain important. So to conclude, I still have 2 more slides. So there's still very open question that could be the base of research agenda in the near future. The first one, of course, as a geographer, I'm biased, is how to geolocalize innovation in KIBs. Do we geolocalize innovation in KIBs from home, from the office, from the headquarters, from the cafe where the highly skilled worker work, from the transport network when he's traveling? So this is an interesting question in terms of the geography of KIBs innovation, is to understand where we should now geolocalize innovation. The second question is, how do KIBs innovate without face-to-face and frequent interaction with client and ecosystem actor? As I say, and as most of the work show, trust is important, being there is important, and firm by being in certain location benefit of those agglomeration economy, but not having access to those agglomeration economy and externality. How do KIBs will benefit of these different elements? Third question is like, what are the dynamics and implications of hybrid model and more digital services production on KIBs innovation? As I say, we know little about these specific dimension of KIBs business model. So of course, more research is required to better understand the hybrid model and to what extent these hybrid model impact on KIBs innovation and KIBs performance. And the last one is, of course, what's the geography of this connection? Can we see a different regional or special pattern of these kind of hybrid model? Will this hybrid model concern more the most dynamic firm, which often are concentrated and located in the most dynamic region? But what will happen for the other region who may have difficulty to implement these kind of hybrid model? Okay. And to conclude, and sorry if I take too much time, does COVID-19 has changed the rule of the game in KIBs innovation research? There's 3 possible scenarios that needs, of course, to be empirically analyzed. Of course, we can see this as a revolution. So if we see this as a revolution, so we will expect that COVID-19 has radically modified innovation and business model in KIBs. I'm not quite sure that what we're facing now, dealing with, is a revolution. We can see it as a booster, So COVID-19 in such case has accelerated processes and practices that were already in place, hybrid model and digital service innovation, for example. Or we can see this as a weak game changer without denying the impact of COVID-19 on KIBs innovation and business model. These changes are rather incremental or minor and have a weak impact on KIB practice and product. So to answer the question whether COVID-19 imposed change, certainly yes, but I cannot provide specific answer to this question since more work has to be done in order to understand actually how KIBs has coped and deal with COVID-19. Thank you very much, and I apologize if I have taken too much time.
Thank you very much, David. And you set the scene very nicely by introducing the key characteristics of KIBs, as well as linking that with the potential hybrid models to ask very specific questions. This is amazing. I think now this will offer Professor Ian Miles to perhaps respond to these key questions, especially because Professor Ian Miles has done specific research on KIBs in the context of COVID-19. So we are very much looking forward to hearing from Ian about perhaps the responses to the questions you raised, and more broadly, what would be the post-pandemic new normal for KIBs. So Professor Ian Miles, the floor is open for you.
Thanks very much, Dr. De Silva. I'm very happy to be here. It's difficult to follow that great presentation from David and taking us off into realms that I know very little about, like the geography issues, which are obviously really, really interesting ones to pursue further. Okay, let me try to get my content going. So PowerPoint slideshow, here we go. So I have had to look at KIBs and the crisis, the pandemic. Hello, my picture seems to have gone again. Am I still sharing?
Yes, we hear you, we see you, as well as we see your slides.
Okay, good. For some reason, I can't see my slides now. They've disappeared for me. But what I will do is turn to the slideshow itself, and then I guess I can watch that. Okay, so here we go. Can you still see my slides?
Yes.
Right, excellent. Well, I was engaged with Russian colleagues on a series of studies of KIBs, where we've mostly been working on secondary data, on published official statistics. And we couldn't help but realize that the agenda was changing very much as a result of the crisis. And I was also confronting this through a knowledge transfer partnership that I've been involved with, where we were looking at and assisting digitalisation processes in a very innovative legal services firm. And the pandemic struck, and we could see how this was affecting the innovation process that we were part of in that firm. So in order to look at this, I first of all would like to suggest a very, very general framework. There are three different sort of elements of what I will call the corona crisis, the pandemic. There's this sort of epidemiology, the virus, the diseases, the virus causes, their spread in the population. And that has some impact in its own right. You know, suddenly people start wanting to buy all sorts of medicines, for example, as a result of this. There are policy responses, government actions, especially with regard to health services, but also restrictions on travel and insistence on social distancing and the like. And then there are the socio-economic impacts of that. Firms ceasing business, being unable to pay debts, people out of work or unable to pay rents, things of this sort. And these are all, these three elements of the corona crisis are shaping business conditions. They'll be shaping the pattern of demand for goods and services. They'll be shaping the ways in which businesses carry out their work, their production, their delivery of goods and services, their coordination of activities across the supply chain. So it's a very simple framework, but I find it quite a helpful one. And if we think about the case of KIBs, then we can see in terms of the patterns of demand, the picture is very mixed. Overall, the statistics that are currently available put together all of the professional, technical, and scientific services, which is KIBs. Not all KIBs, but most KIBs. And we see a sudden drop in demand for them, 2019, 2020. A measure of recovery, but a huge drop, at least 3 times the drop that we saw during the Great Recession of 2008-9. And as David said, sectors like advertising were immediately very badly hit. But the drop in demand for KIBs wasn't unusual. Many sectors of the economy have actually experienced a far worse drop. We're very close to in the UK, the drop for KIBs is very much in line with the drop for the whole economy. And we know that some KIBs sectors have suddenly become winners. They've had vastly increased demand, and where there are share prices involved, share prices have been shooting up for some of these firms. And more generally, KIBs are in the business of providing solutions to business problems for their clients. And certainly their clients have got a heap of new business problems have emerged on them as a result of the corona crisis. So that raises the question of, well, what are these new problems and how are KIBs confronting them? And in particular, there's a question which I've only scratched the surface of. If they're confronting new problems, they might need to have new competencies. How do they acquire these new competencies suddenly in order to do this? Okay, and then in terms of their own processes, KIBs, well, they do face the problem that they actually very dependent upon expert knowledge. In some of the KIB sectors, at least, there are senior people around whom teams work, and some of those senior people may have themselves been incapacitated by illness. More generally, there's disruption of travel. Some KIB sectors are very travel intensive. Consultants pride themselves on being the most highly traveled of all industries, for example. There's disruption of face-to-face encounters, which affects how they conduct their business, both in terms of client relations and how they conduct their business internally. And for some KIBs, we don't think of this as the main, but some KIBs actually depend very much upon physical technologies, physical facilities, infrastructures, and things like that. Like some KIBs run laboratories, for example. How laboratories work is something that's proved very problematic in the pandemic. Some laboratories have shut altogether. Some have already robotized quite a lot of their activities so they can continue doing that. Many will have had to institute some extra hygiene measures if they're to continue working, like installing screens between workers or taking it in turns to use apparatus and to disinfect the apparatus between use. All of these sorts of things going on. So what I'll do very quickly is just take us through some of the different sorts of KIBs and their activities. And as David said, we can divide KIBs up roughly into those based upon more technological knowledge, those based upon more social and professional knowledge, and those based upon more cultural and creative knowledge, P-KIBs, T-KIBs, C-KIBs, for example. And we can identify them with particular statistical categories. As you delve into it, you find that there's been some divergence between the European NACE system and the North American NAICS system. And some of that divergence creates sorts of problems, like one particular problem, the information, what I call here information data processing sector in the European NACE system, that is mainly a business service, but in the American data, that will include a lot of services that are more consumer services, like Google, for example. So maybe the definitional challenges are coming back again in a big way. But in general, I don't think it's so difficult to identify the KIB sectors. These are almost entirely sectors dominated in the US and the United States, at the least, by private firms, who the bulk of whose business, well over 70% of whose share of business is directed towards other organizations, not towards final consumption. Some of those other organizations are the public sector, as well as private businesses. They're sectors of the economy where the share of the labor force, which has qualifications such as academic degrees, is exceptionally high. The only sector that I think is higher is universities, in fact. Higher education, education in general, medical services also have very expert weighted in their workforces. Other sectors of the economy, much less so. Next one down is telecoms and finance. You have to go a long way down. Okay, so some firms experience increasing demand. These firms may also have experienced problems, but one of the smaller sectors, but one which statisticians have pulled out because policymakers are very interested in it for innovation reasons, is the sector of research and development services. I've gone back, I've gone on the slide, yeah. Research and development services. And while there are research and development services active in all fields where there's an interesting and commercially strategic knowledge frontier, there are two that are particularly important here. And one is biotech firms. Many of these are service firms. Some involve a bit of manufacturing, and some of the service firms want to go to manufacturing. Moderna, for example, has become a big vaccine manufacturer, started independently of their universities by Harvard professors and so on. And we see firms like BioNTech, BioNTech in particular. We all know that. It's developed a coronavirus vaccine. FacetoFace is associated with Oxford and AstraZeneca, but has stepped back a bit from this particular activity. Synergen, University of Southampton spin-off, developing technologies for rapid development of antiviral agencies into human lungs, for example. There are many, many firms. You'd be amazed how many firms are active in this industry. At least I was amazed, let me say. These firms are obviously engaged in a great deal of rapid innovation in developing medical treatments and developing new techniques, such as techniques involving gene editing and gene modification and things like that, in order to create new biotech products. But there's another important industry here as well, the clinical trials industry, what is typically called contract research organizations, although you would think that would be a wider term than that. So this is the industry that's developed independent of the main pharma firms, which also do this, to conduct clinical trials. And what is happening right now, of course, is a huge number of clinical trials going on. And that's just a few of the firms involved in this sector. Often big transnational firms engaged in these activities. Clearly very, very important players. And, when the dust is settled, we will be learning a lot more, I think, about the different sorts of knowledge that are operationalized and demanded by people doing different sorts of clinical trials. Obviously, some of the problems that the AstraZeneca-Oxford vaccine have encountered were due to them adopting clinical trial procedures that didn't quite follow those which the standard pharma industry has long developed. These firms are ones which encounter problems to do with physical facilities, laboratories, or running clinical trials while maintaining social distancing. And if you go on their websites, you will practically on all of them find some sort of statement about how they are handling these issues, how they have basically innovated their processes to deal with these issues. And then the other major winners in terms of firms that have experienced a great deal of demand, of course, are those supplying digital services and allowing the rest of us to undertake this transition towards doing what we're doing right now, using Teams, using Skype, using Zoom, and all of these other tools and techniques. And there's a great upsurge in use of these techniques, of course. There's been the appearance of new firms. There's been heavy competitive pressure on existing firms. And again, you can sort of follow in the industry press in magazines like Computer Weekly and the like about how the companies active in this area are responding in terms of introducing new services, in terms of trying to ensure that they're keeping up with their competitors in this area. So a big increase in demand, challenges from that because they've had to scale up considerably to deal with that increased demand, and tighter competitive pressures in this field. And then more under the radar, we can see a great deal of activity going on in quite a lot of other KIB sectors in order to help their customers deal with the problems that they're confronting as a result of the crisis. And in particular, design services that can help support the redesign of buildings, of hospitals, probably of equipment and facilities as well, to support hygiene, to support social distancing, for example. Being involved in the work with the legal services firm, we could see suddenly there's a lot of buzz going on about what was going to be happening in the areas of litigation around the pandemic, occupational health and safety issues, insurance issues, all sorts of things of this order are going to come into play. And what we see immediately on the web pages of these companies, and one of the bits of work I did with my Russian colleagues was looking at some major web pages of professional KIBs. They're starting to basically provide free information to clients about how they can deal with regulations, how they can deal with new challenges, how they can, for example, advise their customers about furlough schemes and things of this sort. So clearly marketing themselves as experts in these areas as part of a strategy of confronting the new sorts of business problems that appear in this field. And then in particular in the UK, we can see the use of this by politicians. But apart from in politics, we know that many firms are rebranding themselves, or creating messages of their own around compliance with, or sometimes evasion of, regulations about social distancing, about keeping safe, about washing hands, all sorts of things of that order. Those of us living in Britain will no doubt be aware of some of the scandals that have arisen around certain political leaders' use of certain KIBs who specialise in market research and public relations to help promote their messages and even inform their policies about dealing with the corona crisis. So that was some thinking about issues and patterns of demand, and I think I've only touched on the surface of the new sorts of demands that will be encountered, or are being encountered indeed, by customers of KIBs, and that thus KIBs are striving to deal with and striving to demonstrate their ability to deal with, because these are potentially very fruitful areas for them to be working in the future. So now I'd like to just very, very briefly take up again the things that David discussed about some of the challenges that KIBs themselves face in dealing with especially the regulatory issues that have come up around the corona crisis. And let's focus just on this issue of face-to-face interaction, which has in the past been extremely important for trust building. As David said, trust building goes well beyond the sorts of things that we normally do effectively using video conferences. There's all sorts of things like meeting over lunch, meeting over a drink, watching other people's non-verbal cues and things of this sort that play an important role in trust building. Have I lost my slideshow?
No, Ian, we can see.
Suddenly I've lost it, but maybe that's just because I've... Okay, here we go again. There are two important issues to the disruption of face-to-face interactions, it seems to me. And one is on how KIBs conduct their work internally, because very often KIBs work in teams. Very often they're project-based organizations who work together in teams built around particular projects. And the teams have to communicate, and they have to share all sorts of insights about the projects they're working on. And the team working is typically a very important way in which knowledge is managed in the organization, and in which newer and junior staff members are brought into the organization, are socialized, are trained, learn the methods of practice, gain the expertise, get the know-how and the know-whom within the organization. And those things, some of them can fairly readily be moved online, but some of them are, of course, very difficult to do so, because online meetings typically are under time pressure, social constraints of various sorts, which face-to-face interactions aren't. There may be some advantages to this. Some sorts of social interaction may be harder to move into the online environment, and some of the more oppressive sorts of things may be harder to move online. But many of the more informal bits of knowledge management are problematic there. And we know, there are famous cases of some KIBs that have long employed social media, in-house social media, as ways of encouraging this informal knowledge interchange. And then the second issue is the interaction between KIBs and clients. And David put a lot of focus on this. KIBs as problem solvers for their clients. Interaction with the client typically, not always, but typically takes place several times, and often many times in the course of the project. When you're hearing the initial client's presentation of the problem, you're discussing what the problem actually is, you're working out possible solutions for it, you're deciding which solution to try to go with, you have a trial, you go further with that solution, you implement it fully, you do a proper evaluation of it. It can be a very lengthy process. In some sectors, I know of cases in the advertising industry where people have broken down this process in a workbook, and they have 14 or 18 different steps that are involved in the course of providing the service to the client. And this can be extremely important. I think it should not necessarily be overstated, although we know that KIBs are one of the most, if not the most, customized parts of the private sector of the economy. When we do survey studies, it looks like, as I said, the data in the results here, we did a survey of American and British firms recently, with Panos Tasilos and others, and we asked firms, what share of your output is one-off services, partly customized, heavily customized, completely standardized services. And only 20% of the firms said that most of their output was one-off services. And as many as 50% said most of our output is standardized services. So the more standardized you are, well, perhaps the less face-to-face interaction you need to be having. It may be a matter of we are provided with the firm's data, and we process the firm's data and return it in a process form back to the firm, and that can all be done digitally. David sort of talked about the move to platforms, and I think what we often see when people talk about minor degrees of customization is that they have a platform and customers are encouraged to choose elements of the service they want from that platform, from a series of modules on the platform. What we
Yeah.
see
Very
when
sorry to disturb you. This is a really interesting flow of arguments and predictions. But will it be possible for you to wrap up in about maybe 2 minutes?
Yep, I'll just about wind up now.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Just two things. One piece of evidence we have is that this is the UK NACE KIBs classification, except the computer services, which are here. We see that this is one of the sectors which is most, during the corona crisis, most went over to home working. The information services sector was the sector that went over most heavily. And when people in KIBs are asked about, when people across the economy, sorry, are asked about, are you planning to use home working as a regular method in the future now, they're also among the highest sectors. So over 40% of the KIBs firms sampled in the UK this year were saying that they would plan to use a great deal more home working in their future. So I anticipate that we're going to get there. So just to say, on the basis of the study that I did with a study that I've been doing in the insurance firm, in the law firm, and my understanding of what's going on the basis of reviewing literature and things like that, is that the immediate impact of the corona crisis has been that a lot of ongoing digitalization has been frozen because the firms have had to put all of their effort into converting themselves to this remote working model. So digitalization of communications, digitalization of existing operations without really changing those operations all that much has become the norm. We digitalize our meetings. We have the same meetings that we used to have, but we digitalize them. Maybe a lot more work for people. We move a lot of things to the cloud. We use cloud services and the like. And some of the more advanced things were stalled. Partly they're stalled because it's harder to do the innovation when you're in a socially distant setting. It's harder to roll out something new and have it evaluated and things like that. But on my assumption would be that what we are likely to see in the future is both a resumption of those past efforts to create more digital AI and data analytics and the like applications within KIBs processes, and a process of learning about what we can do using online communications instead of conventional face-to-face communications. And those of you that do service research will know the Barris model. Barris basically proposed that people apply new information technology to their processes, and then they learn that they can do new things. They don't have to just apply it to their existing processes, and they can introduce new services. And I think that sort of picture is something that's likely to happen very much as well. So the picture is liable to differ across different sorts of KIBs. I think we probably will see a bit of a melange of David's three scenarios as well. But I would anticipate that we will see a big upsurge of innovation in coming years as we move away from the forced rapid innovation associated with the immediate crisis, and people are able to take stock and consider how far they've learned new things which should inform the way they go about digitalizing their businesses. Okay, sorry to take too long off. I'll finish at this point. Hopefully I haven't gone on so long there's no time to discussion.
No, Professor Miles, this is super interesting and really great reflective thoughts around what will be the post-pandemic new normal for KIBs, and thank you so much. So I think we have overrun by 3 minutes, but that's absolutely fine. So And again, we have a very rich audience comprising people from universities, businesses, policymakers, as well as intermediaries. So I'm just wondering whether we should first go for the word of thank, and then perhaps we could stay here. If the audience could stay with us, we could have a conversation. So because some of them might have to leave as well. But I think what we have here is a very rich material for us to take home and think more broadly, because this will definitely influence the decision taken by KIBs as well. So with this note, I would like to invite Professor Suma Arteria from Essex Business School to deliver the word of thank, but we will keep the floor open so that we could actively engage in conversation to those who can stay with us. Over to you, Suma. Thank you so much again, Ian and David. Suma, you are mute.
Yeah, so let me echo Muthu's words. A lot of material, very interesting set of conjectures, Ian, about what's going to happen in the future with KIBs. I just want to thank both of you for taking time, especially Professor Dolorex, because David Dolorex, am I pronouncing the name right? I don't know, I hope. Because you were going to go off on holiday as well. So thank you for taking the time out and speaking to us. And as Muthu says, we do this vote of thanks, but I hope that there'll be a discussion now from the audience and questions and answers. So thanks very much to both of you for coming and spending your time and sharing your thoughts. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Suma. If that is okay with David and Ian, we will have a little bit of a discussion because we have very rich audience here with us today. Is that okay, David and Ian? Okay, thank you so much. So the floor is open for any questions, suggestions, views around this amazing and very insightful information and discussion we have just had.
Can I start with something, Ian? So I found the discussion of the various factors that would influence the KIBs growth quite interesting, but I could not understand whether which do you think is going to have the greatest impact? So of the three types of KIB sectors, which is likely to be the most adversely affected by COVID and which is likely to be the most beneficially affected by COVID? So given that COVID has implied social distancing, inability to meet face-to-face, people have tried to work around it, but there is still there are still some constraints. So which do you think is going to gain from this set of circumstances and which do you think will lose?
Mm-hmm. Well, an immediate thing is the information technology related services have gained.
And they're also hiring.
Yeah, and I think they will continue to gain. Exactly what that means, though, in terms of the preponderance of big firms and smaller firms and things like this, I am rather reluctant to say. It's a sector where there has been a great deal of what's the word, oligopolization in key operating systems and platforms and things like that. And I doubt that is going to be challenged unless we get some. In the past, I suspected we would see a new challenger from China, but right now that doesn't seem to be geopolitically very likely. However, all KIBs have a very, very long tail. And I think in this instance, we're liable to see a fairly rapid process of consolidation of that tail of lots of smaller actors merging or working, maybe doing it in more informal networks, but working together. Because first of all, demand is high, but secondly, demand will be challenging for them, and they will need resources they don't immediately have. And if you think, how do you go about gaining new competencies? Well,
steal somebody else's staff, I think, is the answer.
Yeah, that's right. Recruiting people, training your own people, that's not so popular, but it has been known to happen. Sending people on video courses was happening a lot during the pandemic. But also working in networks, subcontracting to KIBs is actually a way of doing this. And I would not be surprised if you remember that people used to talk a lot about the virtual organization, the virtual firm, which is basically just a network of businesses. I wouldn't be surprised if we see quite a lot of that model coming into play in the TKIBs, right? The other sectors, I really don't know about the CKIB. I think they're so varied. The design services of all sorts, are going to have to adapt very rapidly. Yeah. That's going to be really challenging for them, I think. You can see a lot of noise about this going on in the architecture industry as well. So there will certainly be demand. I mean, again, we're going into sort of futuristic speculation, but I don't think the pandemic is a passing thing. I think we are going to have to build societies that are more resilient against pandemics, because there are going to be future pandemics, and even it's widely believed that COVID is going to be around for a long time.
Yeah,
and it's not like the flu.
No, it isn't.
20% or so of people have long COVID who catch it. 20% of people have long-term health damage. We're not going to be able to say, oh, we'll just let that go on like the flu. We will have to have much more hygiene built into our infrastructure in the future. So I anticipate that all of the KIBs that are providing inputs to that aspect of daily life will be really working flat out to accommodate that demand. David, you have a partner that's in a CKIB, so you probably know about that aspect of the industry.
But what happened in this industry, but I can only talk from what I have experienced with my partner. It's like those who has decided to go digitally, who turn around very quickly. They capture most of the businesses during COVID. But now the situation is completely the opposite. It's like those who has transferred to virtual event or to try to do things online are not the one who can respond now to the new demand, because now things are moving back to normal. That means that they're creating more events. They want to do an in-person event. So those who has been transferring their model towards virtual model are not competing against about what the demand is about the demand. So this is quite interesting. So this is, to some extent, we're back to square one. So those who has not responded, who has not modified their business model, are the one now who are more are capable to respond more quickly and more efficiently to the demand. So this is quite interesting to see. So this is why in my scenario, when I say about being a weak game changer, of course, COVID has some clear implication, and some of the industry has been has changed radically their business model. But overall, the key question is like, is this will really be a big game changer, or we will be back to normal? However, we will need, as Jan, you just raised, we will need to adapt to a more longer process, whereas COVID is just one among several other pandemics that we will deal with. So that could be an interesting question about this. I think now that one of the key questions is the temporal dimension of the change. We haven't talked about this actually. But this could be quite an interesting dimension to look at it, actually, about this kind of temporality, about the change of the business model or the adaptation of the business model.
Good point. And just one more thing, you drew the issue of trust to the fore, David. And one thing that I see asserted all the time in the trade press is that that is benefiting the established KIBs firms in the crisis, because clients don't have the opportunity to develop trust in new services, so they go to brands they know already. I haven't seen evidence for this, but I've seen it claimed very frequently.
Yeah.
I have one more question, but I'll wait for others to ask first.
Thank you very much, Seema. If you have a question, you could unmute and ask the question, or you could raise your hand. Yes, Mohammed.
Hello. Thank you very much for nice and insightful presentation, both of David and Dr. Ian. I actually learned a lot of things from the presentation, and the question is, in the education sector, as David said about the trust, how can we build trust? Because nowadays, some countries, they start with the online exams and take home exams and other things. So the basic question is how we can build trust in educational sector, and how can we overcome this problem, and what are the steps that we need to take to build up trust in, especially in the educational sector. Thank you so much for your nice presentation, and thank you for organizers.
Thank you. And can I add something for that question itself? When it comes to trust, I was just wondering, should we have to think about digital trust building mechanisms? Exactly. So because we are so used to the physical trust building mechanisms, is it something called digital trust building mechanisms? And is there a way in which we could still build trust digitally?
Exactly.
So yeah, over to you, Ian and David.
Thank you,
Mohammed.
There is an industry called trust services, which supports the financial sector on whether creditors are trustworthy or not, for example. That's a long way away from educational services, of course. And also, we know of cases of that industry being abused itself. And so we always, there's no simple solutions. But the idea that we could have systems that could at least provide some level of verification is not impossible. Already there is a very wide use of plagiarism detection in educational environments, for example. That's at university level. How do you tell that somebody answering exam questions or even taking part in a seminar discussion is really providing their own inputs, as opposed to ventriloquizing inputs that are made by someone else? I guess, I don't like the sound of this, but there are a lot of surveillance technologies being developed, technologies to tell whether somebody is speaking the truth, for example. I don't like that, but I can imagine there are a lot of things I don't like, which I see being used by educational establishments, among others. I can imagine that sort of thing being used as well. David and I both had the experience yesterday of being in an educational setting where the student had to show that there was no one in the room with them. We didn't look under their desk. But that's higher education, and I mean, I don't know if the question was specifically about higher education. Things are going to be a lot harder when you're looking at other levels of education, of course. And I don't know what the answer is, but one thing I can predict is that there will be a lot of innovation going on here.
Yes, thank you so much the answering.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi.
Hi, Claudia.
Hi, good afternoon. Just to say thank you very much for, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but if you could speak a little bit louder, that would be...
Okay. Yeah, so I'm trying to find the settings, but okay, do you want me to put my headphones?
That's better.
No, that's better. We can hear you.
Okay, fine. Sorry. Just to say thank you for your presentations, which I found very, very interesting. Actually, my point again is about this issue of trust. I mean, I'm not an expert on KIBs, so I must admit that as a start. But I wanted to say that I feel that trust has many aspects. So there's different aspects that perhaps are affected differently. I'm just wondering your views about that, because there will be the people working in the business, there will be the actual organization, there will be perhaps the way people work as well. So whether the kind of sort of processes they use, if there is trust on those. So I feel that perhaps any research on these issues should distinguish these different aspects of trust, but I'm wondering about your views.
Yeah, maybe I can say a few words, and I will build up on what you have raised as the question. I think the idea of trust, I think the way that we should analyze and study trust will slightly change now, because there's probably different level of trust, but different levels, different scale of trust in such a way that now we were testing and analyzing the role of trust between, KIBs and their clients, or KIBs and their user. But now there's probably another level of trust will be within KIBs actually. So the trust within employees and how, they deliver or they perform in relation to what the KIBs or what the firm is asking. Then also, I like very much the point that you raised, Muthu, about this kind is there's a way to assess or to analyze trust in a virtual manners, and this brings a very interesting question and a very interesting research field. I'm not an expert of trust at all, but this is very appealing in a way that to what extent the mechanisms to assess and analyze trust in the convention way is relevant, whether it's relevant or it's not relevant at all, to analyze trust in a virtual way. So that will be something interesting to look at in the near future. But also in terms of trust, I think now we have new level of trust that should be brought in order to have a complete picture about the importance of trust in the functioning of the specific type of industry.
Thank you. Yeah. And also it's also about analysis of trust as well as the development of trust. Sometimes maybe, I don't know, digitally, we might be able to develop a specific form of trust that we wouldn't have been able to develop previously, like linking with what David said about the location. Maybe I have the potential to develop trust with someone who is, I don't know, somewhere else, like in the US, which would not have been possible otherwise. So I don't know. It's just, I think, very interesting domain of research of practical significance as well, I think.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good question, and it raises lots of things that I haven't thought through properly. One thing which I have been thinking in the British context, we have heard a lot the word cronyism. David may not be so familiar with this, but many contracts have been awarded by parts of the UK government in ways which do not seem completely transparent. And they have been awarded to people that are within the same social network in many cases, and of course, you could put a positive gloss on this, because they are trusted people, and strangers are not trusted. How do we know what their credentials are? But these people, we know them. They're part of our network. And also, it's not just that we know them. If they let us down, we would be able to act against them in our social network. We have a degree of power over them, and that makes us trust in their compliance. That's a positive gloss. I think cronyism is not such a good thing. I've been wondering what the defence is going to be when all of this finally, hits the courts in Britain, because it is going to end up in court at some point in the future. But the idea that you may trust somebody because you believe in them, or you may trust them because you believe that they will be enforced to do the right thing, whether they want to or not, is a very important distinction. Trusting the person versus trusting the person's behaviour and practices. And I haven't really thought that through. So thank you for pointing that in that direction. It's really helpful.
Thank you.
Just one further thing. I mean, it's been a long issue within KIBs, of course, is whether professionals are sitting on their knowledge and not sharing it with their colleagues. Their own standing in the company is based upon their proprietary knowledge. And if they give that away, what's left for them? So,
yeah, this is really interesting. Do we have any? Yes, Suma. Yes, please. If you have any questions from the audience, right? Yes, Suma, please.
Okay, I just wanted to ask this last question. It really relates very much to what Claudia asked, and before that, what you said, Ian, about things maybe shrinking some sectors. So our next debate is going to be on supply chains. And what we know, I mean, this is a sneak preview from the writing in the IB literature on supply chains, is that maybe some of these supply chains will go back to the Chandlerian firms of the past. So that's what is happening, for example, in pharmaceuticals. So many sectors are experiencing it because they are having problems in operating the supply chain over a distance. Everything cannot be done virtually, and so then the old arguments for vertical integration resurface because, of course, they're very sensitive to transaction costs. So we may see the return of the Chandlerian firm. So given that, and then this other question of trust, do you think that that's what's going to happen to professional services too, that they may actually become much more localized? Because this is actually a very efficient way of trying to keep both things together. So it's a last question, and I also think it flags our next debate very well. And gives you an incentive to attend it.
Well, David is the geographer, so I'll speak first, and then he can give the wisdom. But I mean, the sort of standard argument for professional services has been that one of the things that's led to their geographical extension has been following their clients. So this accounting company has a good relationship with this manufacturing firm, and when the manufacturing firm expands overseas, the accountant sets up an office or develops a partnership overseas to follow them. I know that Joanne Roberts was doing work on this sort of theme in the past, for example. So I know it's a fairly well-established approach. I don't know what the current standing of that approach is. But that would suggest that localization might not be quite the right word to describe here. That it may be more to do with proximity to clients, and you may be wanting to be closer to your clients, but that may not mean being more heavily situated in one place. But David, you can.
Yeah, I can add one example from the case of Quebec and Canada when you look about the locational pattern of PKIBs and TKIBs. I'll give you the example of the resource-based sector. So all KIBs related to the resource-based sector won't be located close or nearby their clients. They will be they will be located in Montreal, in Toronto, in Vancouver, and they will travel on a daily basis, 2 or 3 hours, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. They will go in the remote part of Canada. Why? Because, you know, they don't have to be close to their clients. And also, it's easier for them to have access to the highly skilled people. You know? So there's not always a need. And another example from kind of what we find also in the case of the locational pattern of KIBs in Canada is that the ones who are really close to their clients are either located in a highly dense metropolitan urban area, or those in small region, but they offer very standardized services. You know, so again, this raised the issue about, again, the idea about how close you have to be to your clients. You know, how close is close. You know, so the nature of here of the geographical proximity varies significantly from one sector to another, and this has also to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think this marks the end of the third Birkbeck Essex series of debate on COVID-19. And thank you very much, everyone, for staying with us. Like, I think some of them had to leave, but then we had this group staying with us. This is like a replication of after, like, I don't know, post-event tea or coffee that we are having with a rich conversation. And again, thank you so much for this impactful, relevant, as well as very insightful conversation that have also highlighted a lot of areas for future research and also a lot of insights of value to immediate application as well for questions the KIBs should be asking. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And as Suma indicated, the next one will be on supply chain. We will let you know when it's going to be. So wishing everyone a lovely evening, and to David and other colleagues, you are heading towards an afternoon. And shall we all unmute our microphones and then give a big round of applause to our speakers as well as all the attendees. Thank you. Then let's make a, Phil, sorry. Phil,
I was just clapping. I wasn't asking a question at this late stage. But...
Oh, thank you so much, Phil, for joining us. Okay, then, okay, this is the end, and bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, David. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.